one way to think about flow is non-resistance. And so we're going to meditate as usual for 10 minutes, but I'm not going to give you any guidance during the meditation. But I want you to pay attention to resistance within yourself to whatever's going on, and also conflict with yourself whenever you feel in conflict with what's going on, and how to drop whatever it is that is causing that conflict, and to move on without it. So just pay attention. There's no winning or losing. Just pay attention to any time where you feel at conflict with yourself.
Hello, Clara. Um, so before Matthew starts talking, we sent out some questions, hopefully to provoke a little thinking. What we thought we'd try this time is to just ask if anyone has questions or thoughts or confusion. Um, and we'll just write those down and hope that Matthew covers them while he's talking. I've said you cannot start answering them until we get all of whatever the questions are. Um, so, did anyone have any questions come up or thoughts about spiritual flow?
Or anything that came up during the meditation with regards to flow and conflict.
I did, but I'm happy if someone else wants to go first.
Go for it, Mark.
Okay. Um, to be honest, phrased that way, I'm not really clear on the meaning. I know what I think it means, but I'm happy to be corrected. Um, when I think about when I'm in a flow or a spiritual flow, or and I'm going to use the word because I'm trying to say something about it, but um, it's not like something's happening that isn't usually happening and now it's happening. It's more like there's stuff out of the way, like the clouds are out of the way of the sun, not like all of a sudden there's a wind or something like that. And every once in a while there'll just be like a moment of I don't know if it's less thought, or it's just the thoughts aren't binding, or they're not crowding, or I don't know exactly how to say it, but all of a sudden it's just there's just more space. I don't know how else to say it. And to me, that's what flow is. It's not that I'm flowing. It's just all of a sudden there's just more air around me or something like that. So I'm just interested in any kind of clarification around that. I mean, I could say more, but that's essentially it.
That's great, Mark. Thank you. And hello there, Dave. What we're doing now is we're just asking folks if they have any thoughts or ideas or questions that came up during the meditation that you missed, or about the topic spiritual flow. Uh,
Thank you.
I forgot to say one more small thing. Um, I also don't know if spiritual flow is related to like flow through your life or during a given time, or it's more referring to like in the moment kind of flow.
Yes.
So yes, of course.
yeah, we'll hopefully get into some of that. Anybody else? Annie, how about you? I love being the teacher and calling on people.
Okay. I honestly read the questions when you sent them out, so I forgot what they were. uh, yeah, so I'm just open to hearing what you have tonight, Matthew.
That's great.
All right.
Let me ask you this, since you're there and unmuted. Do you ever feel in conflict with yourself?
Just a couple
A
today.
couple, a couple times.
Yes. I mean, we've been emailing back and forth, so we talked more about the duality of things being really like feeling like not flowing when my mind comes in with its ideas, and then I guess I mean I don't know if this is spiritual flow, and you can talk about it later, but it's when there's been that happening, just lots of mind talk, and then just openness and like almost no thoughts, and not a lot in between right now. And so I guess, that feels like a flow because I'm not really taking a lot of action or feeling like I need to do anything, and life's just unfolding in the way, and I'm just kind of just a part of that unfolding.
Right.
Yeah.
So Barry, you put something in the chat, which I think was a definition, but it flashed up and disappeared for me. And want to share read what you wrote?
Oh, well, those were just quotes from the guy whose name I can't pronounce, who wrote Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience in 1990.
Yeah.
And I just put a couple of paragraphs from his book in the chat.
Great.
How would anyone define spiritual flow? Did anyone try to do that?
Here, this is the quote here. The state in which people, and this isn't necessarily spiritual flow, but this is from, this famous book. I can't pronounce his name either, but I am familiar with the book. I haven't read through it. It is quite a book. But anyway, the definition from says the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. Flow depends upon order and consciousness, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. So, but this touches on a definition that I think many people are familiar with from like sports and things like that, or just being in the flow of an activity. Artists often talk about this too, where you lose yourself in the activity. You become so involved that you forget about yourself entirely and become completely absorbed in whatever it is that you're doing. And people often talk about this as, well, some people say in the zone or being in the flow or so on, but these are all different kinds of similar concepts that, all kind of congregate around this idea of flow.
I could add something. This is Mona. Hello to everyone. That it's also, I've been experiencing it when I'm, could be suddenly, or it could be just sort of insights pouring in where pieces of puzzles are all falling into place. And I see the big picture, the gestalt of whatever the topic is.
Nice. Matthew, when we talked, you differentiated between big flow and little flow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, I think, a good, an interesting place to start. And this is true of a lot of different concepts that we approach on the spiritual path. We hear about the small self, also known as the ego, and the big self or transcendent self. So there, like that, there's also small flow and big flow. And the small flow, of course, involves the mind and the ego and feelings of being in conflict with ourselves. But there is also a bigger flow, in which there's never any conflict whatsoever. Because nothing can be stopped, everything is changing, everything is flowing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And in fact, you're a part of it, and you unfolding is a part of that. Even the conflict, the self-conflict that you feel you may have is a part of that larger, big flow. Annie and I exchanged emails recently, and in one of the emails I said, with regards to direct experience, I said, look, I'll tell you a secret. You're never not having direct experience. Even the doubts that we have, or the sense that we are in conflict with ourselves, or that the flow of our lives or our consciousness or our understanding is impeded, actually all of that is unfolding within a larger flow, which is never encumbered, never clouded, and never impeded. And so, the spiritual path, as we understand it, is you could look at it. Bruce talked about approach vectors, and that's kind of how I think about this, in terms of there are many different approaches to the truth, many different vectors, right? All pointing at the same truth. A billion fingers point at the moon, right? So there are all these different approaches, and flow is one approach. But in all these different approaches, the idea is, what is this bigger picture? And how do we put ourselves in that context so that we can transcend all of the conflict or feelings of separation or anxiety or fear, and see the larger picture that is always at hand. And this is related to like that, I know a lot of you have heard me talk about that, folding everything into one. Well, flow is something you could fold everything into. You could see everything as an unstoppable, unimpeded flow of consciousness, awareness, phenomena. And when you see that, there's nothing you can do about it, either inside or outside. And this facilitates a kind of self-surrender, or a clearing of the clouds. As Mark was saying, it isn't something new. It is a clearing away of distractions, or a lifting of the veil, or there's so many different metaphors for this, but it's not something new. It's something that's already there. You have an intuitive sense of it already, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And so it is more a matter of clearing away obstructions than it is of trying to realize anything new. In fact, Ramana Maharshi said, you need not seek or attain any new state. Just get rid of present thoughts. That is all. So these present thoughts are represent the obscuring clouds, so to speak. And you may have noticed, you tell me, this is a question. If in the meditation you experienced any sense of conflict, self-conflict, and so on, did that come along with thoughts? And would that conflict be there without those thoughts? And that being the case, is that conflict, in other words, just a thought and not a true conflict?
How do you define a conflict?
Good question. I would say ultimately there are no conflicts, like I said. But, so in the relative sense, it is like, let's say you have two thoughts that are opposed to each other in some way. or two desires that are taking you in two different directions, or two ideas that you think might be correct, but you don't know which one to decide upon. Or, so all conflicts involve these kind of dualities in which one thing is opposed to the other in some way. And, it could be about all kinds of different things. But in my own experience, self-conflict comes about when you desire two different things and they're not aligned with each other. Or you have two different ideas and you can't reconcile them.
Question. So this line or this question, how do we put ourselves in this context, this big picture that's always at hand? This is like the question in a certain kind of way, and especially since there's nothing you can do and everything is that thing, how can you do anything other than maybe just observe it and let the Dharma do its thing? I mean, that really, this is the question. And I think it's like the answer isn't like, here's what you can do in a given moment. It's like, here's what you can do in your life, and maybe like, I don't know, question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. There is, this is the question, and, that's what I'm always trying to get to is what is the point of all this? And
it's similar to the question actually I asked Joel in the meeting the other day, and he gave the answer, which I kind of knew he was going to give, but I had to ask it and he had to give it, which was like, if you experience yourself as deluded, you have to push, you have to act from where you believe you are. So if you think yourself has to work on that.
yeah, that's true. Bruce and I were actually talking about this yesterday. The Dharma, as Joel pointed out, uses delusion to clarify consciousness. Ramana Maharshi said, the question, "Who am I?" is like a stick used to stir a funeral pyre, and which will itself be consumed. So in this case, the stick is like the Dharma. At the end, that has to go too. And so,
Great metaphor.
this is what we have. We have words, we have teachings, we have concepts like flow, which are all of these approach vectors. And through these different ideas, and I would add, I think it's beneficial to see it from all of these different angles. So we as modern people have a great benefit, a great gift of being able to see this kind of fundamental teaching expressed in many different ways from different traditions. That's helpful because not only does it lend credibility to it, you see that the same insight has happened over and over and over and over again from people, different time periods, different cultures, different geographical locations. But also, each mind has its own unique way of deluding itself, has its own unique way of getting lost in phenomena and in the sense of self. And it will have a unique solution, a unique unwinding. And so to be able to see the vast array of teachings and hear the fundamental teaching in many different ways has the benefit of potentially exposing you to the way that's going to finally unlock your own mind. And I don't know if that answers your question. I think I forgot the question. But...
No, that's all of that was an excellent answer. Thank you.
And then the other thing that I will add is, because you mentioned earlier this, our are we looking for flow in the moment or flow in the course over the whole life? And I said yes, but because yes, of course, you know, but you know, the flow of your whole life is made up of it's always the present moment, you know, uh, and so and so you can never go wrong with finding that flow now in the present moment. And in fact, that's really the only place.
That's all you can do. Yeah.
It's the only place you can ever find it. You can imagine in the past, oh, I had it there, you know, one time or whatever, or I'll have it sometime in the future. But the only place you can ever really be in the flow is now. And in a certain way, you can never not be in it. And that's what you know, the teachings are trying to help us realize, that you can never not be in it.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So, okay, we could never not be in it, and you mentioned in the meditation, was there any conflict? And without, I think you said, without thoughts, would there be conflict, right?
Mm.
Okay. So the identification with thought seems to feel like the flow is blocked, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, give me a second.
Yeah. Strictly
Letting that sink in. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
speaking, the thoughts aren't the problem. It is, as you said, the identification with them that causes this feeling of being stuck.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because I've heard you say that, and I've heard it a lot recently. Like, you know, it's my thoughts are not my problem. It's not a problem. They just happen. They appear. I witnessed this, right? They appear. They're out of nowhere. They come and they go. Now the identification, like that, the conflict of identification, which is all a part. This is conceptual right now. All a part of awareness. But that identification that feels like conflict, how do I either accept that or see through it or make it stop? Which I guess not acceptance, but
Yeah, right. Make it stop. Yeah, that's not acceptance, right? So, so, yeah. I mean, this is the fundamental question too. You know, is yeah, how do you make that happen? And in a certain way, look, the sense you have that you are a separate self is created by this identification. So, I mean, this is the kind of the root paradox that all spiritual seekers are confronted with. You know, how do you stop it when you're the thing you're trying to stop? You know, you're trying to stop this identification, but that's what, you know, that's who the doer is. And so the answer is you can't stop it. You can't do anything about it. But if you become thoroughly 100% convinced there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, it will just fall away on its own. But you have to see that there's no way out. There's nothing you can do, because in reality, this you who you thought would do something is a kind of you know, it's not real in the way that you think it's real. That's all. You know, I often shy away from using these terms like delusion and illusion, but they are very useful terms. And you know, the self, the individual self, of course it's real. It's just not what we generally think it is. It is there. we think that it's an object, but there's no such object. And so you can't get rid of it because it doesn't exist. It's a phantom, a creation of the mind. So we spend all this time trying to get rid of something that has no substance. So if you, instead of trying to get rid of it, just drop present thoughts. Whenever these thoughts arise and cause these conflicts, remind yourself it's just a thought and drop it. If you do this consistently, the underlying flow will start to just shine through. As Ramana said, you don't need to discover any new state. The original state is already there. It's never left. It's never absent.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I was going to say this, but I think you answered it. Is in the flow with very little thought or no thought, in awareness. When the identification happens now, it feels much more painful over like something that I would consider minor before, like something I wouldn't even notice. But identification feels very painful now, because that's because the flow feels really nice,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's just that reminding, like, oh, and that's just a thought too, and that's just a belief. That's just a thought. That
Yeah.
That's all part of it. That's yeah.
And to be honest, some of this teaching can sound nihilistic in a way, but I would argue that it isn't at all nihilistic. It is merely trying to help us see clearly the situation that we're in. So to see clearly the truth isn't nihilism. That's embracing the truth, denying the truth is kind of nihilistic in a way, that's, and I'm not saying take my word for it. As you pointed out yourself, you can see now that you're seeing that identification happen with your thoughts. You see that the thoughts arise and then the mind attaches to them, becomes identified with them, and then from that arises various kinds of suffering, conflict and suffering, right? So you have the insight. This is what causes suffering, is identification with thoughts. Again, the thoughts aren't necessarily the problem. They can be useful, and help us navigate our lives and so on and so forth. But to become identified with those thoughts, or to mistake them as something real, something to mistake them for reality, is what leads us into various forms of suffering.
But isn't suffering good?
Yeah, it's great because it leads to these kinds of insights. That's what it's good for. Is if we suffer enough, when we've been around the wheel of fire enough times, we start asking ourselves, is there any way off this wheel? What is going on that I'm suffering so much? How I keep banging my head against the same wall. At least this was my experience in life, I found myself doing the same things over and over and over that never worked out and always caused me grief. And so, the good thing about the way suffering is good is that it turns us toward the truth. It's a good teacher, in other words.
Matthew, what's inside and outside of spiritual flow?
Well, with regards to the big flow, there's nothing outside of it. And even that's not quite right because there is no inside or outside to it. That's all there is. With regard to the small flow, it depends how you draw your lines. You know, at each moment we consider, we think we have an inside and an outside. And our small flow usually happens when the inside and the outside seem perfectly aligned, you know?
Mm.
And so because they seem in that moment perfectly aligned, we experience this wonderful experience of flow. But then when the inside and outside are not aligned with, we experience something else and we say, I'm not in the zone, or I'm getting in my own way, like if you're, there's a big problem in like athletics and stuff like that. You find people have like they're getting in their own way. Even somebody who's very good at something can start thinking about it too much and then they start doing terribly at it. It's a really interesting phenomena, and it's this conflict between perceived inside and perceived outside.
Isn't that perceived conflict, that misperception, why there is the conflict?
Yeah.
Yes,
Right?
yes, yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, of course.
Well, you say of course, not from the, it's hard to say, of course, from the inside of it, from no,
Well,
no pun intended, from the experience.
Fundamentally, there are no conflicts. So all conflicts that you perceive are there because you perceive them, you know? And so, if you're doing something and you think, I made a mistake. What is a mistake? Did you make a mistake or are you just learning? There's no mistake. The mistake is your idea. That's your thought. You made the mistake. In a different sense, right? Yeah, see, that's what I mean. All these anything that arises that seems like it takes us out of this flow actually is just mind created. They're just various judgments based on an idea of an inside and outside, a self and other, a self and world. And so we think, I made a mistake, or this wasn't right, or these two things are in conflict, or whatnot. Yeah, I mean,
Kind of like if you back up far enough, it's not regarding the individual things that seem to be in conflict. It's the fact that that you see individual things that is the conflict. It's not even about, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And especially that one of those things is you. that's the real kicker, But
Can I ask you something, Matthew?
yeah,
So I'm confused because I get the idea of the big flow, right? But then I think you call it small flow. I don't get it because what does it mean to be in the flow in the small sense? Does it mean that everything's going great? That you think they're not mistakes? It's a judgment of the mind. Yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm in the flow. What is it? And I know the definition
yeah.
of the book, and I read the book too, and I think it's a great book. But confuses me a little. Like, so the small flow is when everything spiritually goes okay and we're meditating every day and having great meditation. What is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, ultimately, I think what we experience as this small flow is basically like a thinning of the veil, which keeps us separate from this larger flow. That's why that's why the experience is so wonderful, to become
so
absorbed
what
in
we
something.
so is that referring to what we in the past in this group have called glimpses of the truth? Is that what
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
calling?
certainly this could be a glimpse of the truth. Um, I mean, have you ever been like so involved in a task that you lose track of all time, forget about yourself, maybe forget to eat, forget to drink water, forget to get up and walk around because you're so involved with what you're doing? So the phrase that people say is you lose yourself. Well, this losing yourself is basically like a merging with this larger flow. But, we're dipping in and coming out, and it's momentary or temporary.
I was curious, if I can ask, and I don't know if you answered this already when I wasn't here, but when would you apply or why would you use the word flow? I mean, Clara brought in the example of, well, is this like a glimpse, which is another term that's been used. So what about flow? Maybe as a teacher, why would you use that word to get a point across?
Yeah, I mean, it would, as a question, that would depend on the person. Like if a person in their meditation, for example, was constantly being bombarded with conflicting thoughts, then this might be a good concept to explore. Ultimately, look, all these things, glimpses, flow, um, they're nothing. They're just ideas. And so they're good or helpful insofar as they're good or helpful. So, in Buddhism, they talk about skillful means. So skillful means is applying concepts and ideas in a way that helps that helps people see clearly. So it would depend on the person, um, and but yeah, I think it's a useful concept for meditation. It's certainly useful in physical activity and things like that. Um, but also, I think the other thing is, I was thinking about this earlier. We have a lot of phrases in use, like sayings that we say to express a certain aspect of our experience, and everybody is familiar with them. And they're so common that they're kind of cliche, but actually many of them are quite profound. And one of them is go with the flow. so, so this is something that people say, and because it's a cliche, we don't think about it too much. But this is actually an extremely profound idea, to go with the flow. And so in that sense, it's a useful concept. What is that flow? What speaks of the flow a lot is the Tao. The flow of the Tao, is if you read the Tao Te Ching, correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, it's been a long time, but it speaks a lot about flow.
It does.
So everything is unfolding, everything is moving in motion. You can see this if you watch your own mind. It's always in movement, always in motion. And the perceived conflicts and things like that are really they're just attachments to one idea or another idea. And as soon as you let go of those attachments, it's just those thoughts will work themselves out. You know, this is something you can do in your everyday life. If you ever have a problem, like some kind of normal life problem that comes up, like, you know, you said the wrong thing at a cocktail party and somebody got offended or something like that, you know. And now you're obsessing about it or are upset about it. I mean, do what you have to do, apologize to the person or whatnot, but it still kind of grates at you, right? It's still like in there or something. So whatever the problem is, just wait. That's it. Just wait. Be patient. And it will resolve itself. It will subside, that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling that you made a mistake.
Matthew, when was the last time you were at a cocktail party?
Like a full-on cocktail party? I don't
Yeah.
know. It's been a while. I occasionally make tropical drinks, you know, like I enjoy going to a tiki bar, you know. So when I travel, I often look if there's a local tiki bar to visit. It's not really a cocktail party, but, you know, there are cocktails.
But it kills the pain.
Yeah, there are cocktails. So.
Okay, I'm going to throw out another question for you, Matthew, and try to pull a few threads that you and I talked about. In when it's the big flow, there we talked about there being what was the word? Effortless action. Um, and then we also talked a little bit about the relevance of any sort of spiritual practice, meditation, Tai Chi, and surrender to the flow. So I guess practice and surrender are somewhat different. So if you can tie together effortless action or practice, effortless action, and surrender.
Hmm. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are doubt, are questions, are conflicts, are troubles. They're all resolved by surrender. So that's the point of practice, is to get us to that point of surrender. Enough of the, you know, we have to see through enough through practice, have enough insight that we start to move toward the truth more and more. But ultimately, this is all leading to just surrendering the self, surrendering the thoughts, surrendering the desire to be somebody or to be in control or to know what's going on or to understand the universe. So, you know, practice gives us that kind of insight that brings us to that threshold of surrender. Without it, I think that, you know, I mean, I would argue that our lives themselves are a kind of practice, a kind of spiritual practice. Um, so in that sense, actively engaging in spiritual practice, putting effort forward on the path is a way of just like engaging in that process or accelerating it, so to speak. But look, the arc of life itself is a spiritual path. You know, we get lost in it. We become identified with this mind, this body, and its history through life. We have all these ideas about it and goals for it and worries about it. But where is it all going? It's not going to last. It doesn't even last now. If you watch close, moment by moment, day by day, everything's falling away. Everything is changing. You're not the same person now that you were yesterday or even 5 minutes ago. And so, everything is going to change. It's constantly changing. And so this whole life is you know, a big teaching on letting go. Letting go of ourselves and letting go of our selfishness, you know, our attachments to our fixations. Nothing can be fixed in place. But, you know, the good news is that the underlying reality is quite wonderful. It's good. So why not let go? I mean, there's not really any alternative anyway. The reality is we're constantly sort of being forced to let go. Why not go with the flow and join with that larger flow that's ever changing? Throw yourself into the mix. And you know, so there's something wonderful about it. Something really wonderful. And yeah. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not. But yeah.
Could I share a comment?
Yeah.
I mean, our discussion feels like it's been focused on a path of inquiry, but you know, the bhakti path, when I think about gaps in spiritual flow, seem to arise when one is motivated by other than selfless love and compassion. You know, when love and compassion are why one is here, is doing it, is living, being, there seems to be more of a spiritual flow. When we're not motivated by love and compassion, but something much more self-centered, then we kind of lose lose that flow. Made me think of that thought came to me as I was contemplating coming to the Zoom meeting. I was on I-5 today, and in the middle of nowhere, on lots of farmland going by, there was a small printed sign on a fence that it said, "True love never ends."
Hmm.
I had no idea why that sign was in the middle of nowhere on I-5, but it caught my eye, and therefore, for a few miles, I was contemplating that statement. And I think the key word is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's when it's true, truly love, truly loving in your life, you're in the flow.
Yeah.
You're in the big flow.
You're in the big flow. And that big flow is unending. Yeah.
It's unending, right?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. My neighbor across the street has signs that say things like, don't give up and you're enough. And I'm always appreciating these signs that they put out. And I think that's true. And I don't think this is any different, the bhakti path and the inquiry path. They are one and the same. And precisely because of that, when you notice that you are absorbed into that flow, when you are motivated by love and compassion, true love and compassion, and that when you stray from it, things get rocky. You get confused, there's conflict arises and everything like that. And so just that noticing that is the heart of inquiry right there. Noticing that love orients us properly to the true flow of life, Yeah. And also just, when we're not self-obsessed. When we're self-obsessed, we find all kinds of problems, all kinds of conflict. But when we're looking fully at everything and not thinking of ourselves so much, these conflicts subside. So,
Liz has a question.
yeah.
So, as a spiritual practice, would probably be helpful then for, I don't know if it's the same for everyone. Would be helpful for each person to really look at what keeps them from being in this flow. Like Mona just said, if she's not acting out of a love and compassion heart, then she feels like she's fallen out. Or control is a huge one. If you're trying to control a situation, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
If you're just not content with things as they are at the moment, whether you're trying to control them or not, you're just not happy with how things are. So as a practice, probably it differs from person to person, but it's really something to put some effort into finding what it is that's blocking yourself, I guess.
100%. Yeah, you have to study yourself, your own reactions to the world and events and what's going on. And through that, you'll gain insight.
Yeah.
And just to bring in the whole of our experience too, I was I don't like to leave a meeting without saying something about deep sleep. So ask yourself, what conflicts arise in deep sleep? Perfect flow, deep sleep, and it's wonderful. No problems in deep sleep, no problems whatsoever. Yeah.
I'd like to say something about what Liz just said, this question about what keeps us from being in the flow in our spiritual practice. And I was thinking about it, and I think for me right now, what keeps me in the flow, it's exactly kind of removing the judgments of I'm doing well in my practice or not because I'm having more glimpses, or I'm being more steady in my practice. Because I think I've learned, and I hear you, Matthew, saying many times that I think that's a judgment. When we even having a glimpse and thinking that's better than having a bad day in which you're disconnected, is a judgment. So right now, for example, for me, it's more about removing that judgment and thinking that I know when I am closer to awakening or not. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I think it's just, just that. It's a judgment to think. And for me, it's keeping me more in the flow to think that I don't know, what's happening, that I don't need to judge that because I'm disconnected or in a bad day, I'm not making any progress.
Yeah.
You might have even said that even when we think we are not doing anything, the thing is moving because we're not in control really of the awakening. So for me, being in the flow has more to do with actually removing that judgment of
Yeah.
whether I am or not in the
Yeah, I mean,
flow.
this is kind of exactly what I mean when I was talking earlier about just dropping thoughts. Judge all these judgments are thoughts. And with those judgments comes the whole structure of how you see the world, your whole view. I'm doing well. I'm getting more insights. I'm really starting to get this. All this is doing is reinforcing an egoic view of the world, in which you're going to win the spiritual game, and and so yeah, absolutely, to see that those thoughts actually take you out of the flow is true insight, and to drop the judgments. There's judgment is like attachment to a particular thought. And by however you judge things to be, you will be bound by that now. That's why, in the Bible it says, judge not, to refrain from judgment is because by your judgments you will be judged. You will be bound to those judgments.
But then wouldn't you say that even the definition of being in the flow, I'm talking small flow, is a judgment because
Yeah.
I had a glimpse.
Yes, it is. And
Having a glimpse is better than not
sure.
having
Yeah,
any, or that
it is.
having
And
a good day.
yeah, it is. And notice even this thought, this judgment doesn't happen in the small, even the small flow. It happens as you come out of it, you know? And if you start thinking about it too much, it will kick you out of it. Right? Because as soon as all of these self-judging thoughts arise, that flow is obliterated. Because the flow involves losing yourself, letting go of yourself. And so, yeah, it usually only happens in retrospect. You think, oh, I was really in the flow there. I was really doing great. Or, oh, I had this great insight, and so on and so forth. In the moment, you don't say that. You're in the flow. When people came and asked Ramana questions, some conflict they had or some question they had, he would sometimes say, "Did you ask this in deep sleep?" Saying that's kind of the same thing. See, when you are gone, do you still have this problem?
Because I've noticed this tendency in myself, and I think it's not uncommon in people in the spiritual path, which is a constant judgment of how personally, how am I doing? Am I making progress? Am I a good practitioner? I'm farther, I'm closer from. And
Yeah,
I see a lot of people in the path have that, and that brings a lot of suffering because it's
it
constant
does.
evaluation
It does.
that
Yeah.
it's unnecessary because ultimately It's not in our hands.
No. No, no, no. And this is where the great benefit of the devotional path comes in. Turn all of that responsibility of yourself over to God. It's not your problem. Say, you take care of it. You know what's best for me better than I know what's best for me. So I put it all into your hands. That's true surrender. I don't care what happens. You decide. Whatever you decide is good for me, and I'm happy with it. That's, you give up all of that responsibility and judgment and free yourself from it.
With that, you have another question, Mona?
Well, I just wanted to comment that what has been helpful for me, Clara, is stepping out of the I word and just saying, judgment is arising, or longing is arising, or sadness is arising, or earlier you said an error, and you go, I made an error. Just say, oh, an error arose. It's in the phrasing, but it can be a helpful reminder. Sort of not everything is self-referential. There is the flow going on that doesn't involve the little I. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one of those, this is actually a fundamental meditation practice. You've probably all maybe done it, called noting. When, let's say you're doing concentration practice, you're watching the breath, and then at some point you notice that the mind is strayed from its attention. And so you note whatever it is that has distracted you, and you can have like a few categories, like thoughts, judgments, emotions, sensations, and so on. And all you do is you say, oh, well, that's just a thought, and then you bring your mind back to the meditation object, and it strays again, and you have like a judgment. You say, oh, well, that's just a judgment. Bring your mind. And this is a way of teaching the mind that all of these things are basically just thoughts. And this way of doing it, just like you were saying, is a way of teaching you to see them in the proper perspective, and so that you don't become attached to them or
Identifying with
identified with them. Yeah, great. Yeah, really good.
We have 30 seconds for a final comment, if anyone has one.
I would just comment, these were thought-provoking questions. Thank you for bringing them up.
Thank you all for showing up so that we can have this great conversation. I appreciate it. And yeah.
So flow is spontaneously and freely unfolding. There's no doer there. There's no us there. There's no, this present moment just appears. May each of us surrender that little self to this present moment.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you all.
Peace to you all.